You are now listening to Asking for a Friend with TalkDoc, sharing insights through real, honest, and practical ways to improve your communication and relationships. Featuring your hosts, Dr. Pamela Kreiser, Meredith Edwards Nagel, and Teighlor Polendo.
It's Valentine's Day week.
I know, which is poignant for the timing of this particular topic. I think
That's true. That's absolutely true. So happy Valentine's Day, everyone.
Happy Valentine's Day. Try not to read the minds or have your mind read of your loved ones.
Focus on the impact.
There you go. So who put up this quote to get us rolling on this?
I'll just read you the quote so you
Yes.
know what we're talking about.
Mhm.
The quote says, it's Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And I think that is pretty much this topic today. It's what they walk away with, what they understand, what they feel from you.
The impact that you have on those people. And that's why that quote's so magical.
Yeah. So it doesn't really matter. We're talking about communication all the time. We get hung up on words, but what they walk away with, how they feel about whatever it is you said.
Yeah, I feel like the core of this episode is that our communication isn't just about the words or just about what comes out of your mouth and the talking, right? It's about making sure that the message you're trying to convey to someone actually lands with them.
My favorite. It's like when people say, I didn't say you are a bitch. I said you're acting like a bitch. Well, the message is you think I'm a bitch. So you got it. And we get hung up on these little words. But
Right.
it's what landed is what matters.
Yeah. Yeah. The message received being the one that counts is if you send like a we need to talk text, but someone freaks out on the other side, like, what does that mean? But you were just trying to hang out.
Yeah.
Or I'm fine, but you're obviously not fine. How you said I'm fine is what really landed with that person.
Do you feel like this is why communication via email, text, messaging is so confusing? I really need tone.
Mhm.
I need to be able
Yeah.
to feel your warmth and energy around your message, all the nonverbals.
What makes me laugh about what you're saying is when someone calls you and you have the options, at least on the iPhone, of sorry, can't talk right now, driving, and you can edit those, right?
Yeah.
So I edited the options after I had my first kid to say, can't talk, please text. Meaning if I was putting her down or I was doing something with her and I didn't want to just be on the phone. But if you needed to send me something, I could get back to you in a minute. Said, I can't talk on the phone, just text me. I thought that's a nice, quick way of telling somebody, I can't talk right now, but send me a message. We're all good.
Yeah.
One of my really close friends and my sister both told me, that's really cold. Okay, Meredith, can you be any more direct? I was meaning it in a warm way, but like you're saying, Teighlor, I think they read it, I can't talk to you, so just text me only. But I think what we're trying to get into is basically like the misunderstandings of what you're saying and what a person is hearing on the other side of the table and those mishaps, right? So why does this happen? And what do you do with that awkward tension?
Yeah. So we're talking about intent and then we're talking about impact.
Yes.
And so when we think about intent, we're thinking about what the original speaker meant. This is when we're on the up and up, when we're communicating in a non-manipulative way.
Yes.
But this is when that speaker is trying to say a certain thing. And then the question is, does that equal the impact? And of course, we all live on Earth and we know it doesn't.
I like that. That's a good
So we know that we mean one thing and it doesn't happen. And it ends up being a struggle, I think, on the daily, honestly, between this idea that we meant something and that the impact doesn't equal that. And so that reminded me of that story, Teighlor, from when we started the podcast, where your husband had said something to you.
Oh, yeah. You're finally doing something.
And you're doing
that.
You got to retell the story.
We're starting this podcast and he says, just happy you're doing something. And I'm like, damn, this guy, he thinks I don't do enough. I'm a terrible wife. I'm a terrible mother. I don't provide enough. I'm doing nothing with my life. He's just finally happy I'm doing something. But of course, he meant I'm just happy you get to do something for yourself. And yeah, that was not a good week in the Polendo household.
So he said that to you and then you went and pondered it?
Oh, yeah. I went and stewed. I don't think I initially fight back. What's the verbal processor or internal processor?
Sure.
I think I have to sit and stew on something and figure out what I felt about it. And then once I figure that out, I can bring it back and say, hey, did you mean I do nothing in my life? Do I do nothing with my life? And he was able to correct his message because what landed was not what he intended.
So that's interesting. So he says this thing, you go ponder it. And I think that's a tricky place for all of us, because if we have a really big mismatch between the intended message and the impact message, then we're thinking maybe negative things. What does he think about me? What does he think about what I'm doing? Doesn't he think I'm enough? Like you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
You do all that questioning when in fact it was meant to be a supportive message. So then who's at fault?
The communicator, right? It's on the communicator to make sure that whatever message they're trying to communicate, it's on their shoulders to make sure that what lands.
Do we believe that, or does research say that's true 100%? Because I want to wrestle with that.
The research with Stamp and Knapp, they had their article that they came out with that said, basically, we could say it's whatever was intended, or we could say it's whatever the impact is, or we could say it's a negotiated thing. Ultimately, in their research, they said it's negotiated when it's a close relationship. So your story is very typical in that he said this thing, intended it one way, you took it a different way, and then you negotiated together what that meant. And he essentially, because of the close relationship, was able to give you other messages that qualified that first one that made it seem better. I was just glad you're doing a podcast. I want to be supportive of you. I'm happy for you.
Yeah. And that took having the relationship and previous good exchanges that I could come back to him and say, hey, is that what you meant? Because if it was just a stranger, I would have never brought that up. I'm like, wow, they just think I'm nothing. Okay, peace out.
Yes. So that is a great distinction, because there is the study by Albright and their group of researchers where they contrasted strangers and intimate partners and found that intimate partners were able to do just what you said. They draw on other information and they're better at negotiating. Whereas you and I have big errors in impact versus intent when we're dealing with strangers. If somebody cuts me off on the freeway, I don't know that person. I'm far more likely to be like, that's because they're jerks, or that's because they hate women, or I could say all these things, decide their intent, when in reality, there's some other thing going on, very likely. But I have no other contextual information, according to Albright. I'm going to make much bigger errors when it's outside of a close relationship. When we're in these closer relationships, we have a better shot at doing what you said, which is take other information from the close relationship, use it to qualify what's being said.
Doesn't Brene Brown talk about that? If you believe with those strangers, if you just believe the positive about them, you'll have a better time yourself, whether or not it's true. If you just believe that stranger on the freeway who cut you off, they have an emergency.
I think I mentally approach people as they're giving their best.
Yeah.
If you believe the best about someone, that they're doing the absolute best they could, then whether or not it's true doesn't matter. Your day goes better.
Definitely talks about that. So you're suggesting we have a positive outlook?
And you're suggesting that we want to have more peace and stability in our lives. You know, I mean, I'm seriously, I think this intent impact gap, right, is what we're talking about. You intend this, the impact is different, right? But how do you repair it? The conversation I feel we're having is how to focus on repairing those things or adjusting our communication with trusted, good relationships. There's going to be people that don't want you to repair it because they like to live in chaos. And we're focusing on the people that we have trusted relationships with. That was a big distinction for me. Learning about this is I can look back, and I'm sure other people can, in their lives where you've tried so hard to repair the miscommunication with somebody that doesn't even want that to be repaired or isn't in trying to entertain a more peaceful conversation. So this focus for me is when I see that what I intended didn't land with a person I love and it's a trusted relationship, I want to work on this repair.
Sure, because you care about the impact when it's a close relationship. When I'm on the freeway and I cut somebody off, I'm like, whatever, they'll get over it.
Yeah.
You move on real fast, right? And there's probably some gray area where we might have friends, maybe not our closest relationships, we're like, wow, you moved on real fast from that. We're a little surprised you moved on as fast as you did. You wrecked me with your message, and now we notice the gap and you don't really own anything. So that's a little troubling. But you're talking about those closer relationships, right? Where we want to narrow that gap. What we see then in the relationships that are healthy is noticing there's a big disparity between the impact and what was intended and rescuing that disparity and saying, I'm going to get in there and let's talk about what I actually meant because I care about you and I want the impact to be healthy and positive and what I intended to say.
And that is really hard to do when you start laying other things in the middle of a fight and someone calls you on something, oh, you said this message and it hurt me or whatever. I tend to start to get defensive. So then I start to layer all these other communication problems in where it's, I could just own up to my ego and say, that's not what I meant. And this is actually, I just want to tell you I care about you or whatever message I am trying to convey. But I start to backpedal and I didn't say it like that. And I start to fight, I guess, that message. And
so let's talk about that particular phrase. That's not what I meant. Now, we've all said it. So in that moment, you're getting defensive, saying that's not what I meant. Or you could say something even more separating in your message, which would be, you don't have to take it that way. Or you don't need to be so sensitive. Or I didn't mean it for you to take it that way. There's different qualifications that I might say.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is that widens the gap.
Yeah, when you said it separates, that for me was a good visual. It's a way of being defensive, of relieving blame that my communication could have landed on you in a way that wasn't what I meant. It's like taking back, pushing the blame back almost. Yeah.
You can see how the messages, even the defensiveness, is going to push that other person further away, not closer.
And then you start fighting about the fight and not the actual message, right?
You can if you want to really get into it. Yeah.
I'm unhappy with where this is going because I'm being called out right now. Let's go. Keep going. Telling me what is.
I'm just saying what I do. I'm not saying this is what you should do. I'm just saying this is what I do.
For me, when I'm in those moments, I think it's always what I would call the big math versus the little math. And I like to bring in math whenever I can, as you know. So the little math is our argument. And the big math is, do I care about this relationship?
Okay.
I always think there's a fight between those two things because sometimes you want to win the little argument. You want to be right. You want to say, I didn't say that thing, or you don't have to take it that way, or I didn't mean that thing, or don't be so sensitive. It was a joke, or whatever we like to say. However, a lot of little math equals big math. So we can't have that all the time and have it not affect our grand relationship, our larger relationship that we have. And it's challenging because I think we lose sight, honestly, in a conflict. I think we get into the conflict and we think, I'm going to win this argument, or you're pissing me off enough that I'm going to get defensive and I'm willing to have us separate a little bit. But there's the big math that it affects ultimately. How's it going, Meredith?
I think I'm having this realization. I don't know why the word separating bothers me so much, that I would do something with my spouse or my best friend or my sister or my mother, which is being defensive. I'm quick to go to that place. That would push us farther rather than me trying to just, I don't know, push so hard to defend my point instead of looking at the relationship to be successful. Like you're saying, the little math is me going, I can defend myself, but the thought of the little ones all adding up to the bigger point. I'm processing this in my mind out loud. I hope I'm making sense, but I don't like
wear and tear is how I think of it.
I don't like to think that my behavior is what's pulling apart my relationship, or that my behavior could strain my relationship by doing this thing. To see that and acknowledge it and try to find a shift makes me go, okay, so how do I repair this? How do I focus on being okay with being a communicator and a person that isn't always going to perfectly land what I want to say, and being okay with that? Especially when it matters to me when I say something. I want it to land. I want the person to get what I meant every time, until I acknowledge the fact that I'm human and that won't happen.
But I don't know that we have to say that's exclusive. We don't need to say that we're getting into these conflicts and that's the only impact on the larger relationship.
Sure.
So in the rare instance where Meredith has an argument that's negative and separates, you could equally come in and say positive things that are very supportive that match your intent with the impact.
Oh, sure. Probably focusing too much on control and perfectionism. And so I'm bothered that I'm human in this moment.
Oh,
That's really a good way to start the year. Happy Valentine's Day, everybody. You're not perfect.
No, we are indeed not perfect.
It's funny that this is happening around Valentine's Day of thinking of these thoughts of, oh, they should know what I meant. Duh, don't you know me? I shouldn't have to explain myself. And I think about that, and I know I have those thoughts, but in some way, that's a cheap way of saying that. But I'm going to be human. There's going to be conflict in my relationships. It will happen. Let it go. And I'm not going to be perfect every time. So what do I do when this happens? When my intent doesn't land? What's the next step? Don't be defensive. Number one. Great. That's going to be difficult.
And you're talking about when you're the speaker and
Yes.
the intent doesn't come across. The impact is negative, maybe when you meant it positive or
Yes.
whatever. Okay. We could talk about both sides. So as a speaker who is giving messages out, we have to think about our responsibility. And I think ultimately we have to say this phrase that we all talk about a lot, which is the message received is the one that counts. So I can spend a lot of time defending, I meant this thing and you're not hearing it right. And I meant this thing and you're not seeing it the right way, which is my way. But ultimately, if we were going to look at the broader spectrum, we would always say the message received is the one that counts. So it doesn't actually mean anything that you didn't mean to hurt me. You did. And that's how I see it as a communication expert. We can talk all day long about how you didn't mean it. Isn't what happened. And to the extent the impact is there, that is going to be the driver for what needs to be repaired.
Okay.
And that's where you get into what you just talked about, which is I don't want to be wrong. I want to be perfect. I want you to get what I'm saying in the right way because I have a right way. I want you to hear it. And all of that doesn't equal being sensitive. It's the opposite, honestly. My way is the right way, but your way is the impact. And that's where empathy is.
Great. Even more called out. Thanks.
So, I mean, that does say to us as speakers that we want to watch, as you said earlier, how our messages land. But I also think that we don't want to forget that when we see them land in ways we don't wish to have happen, we can correct it then. You know how you say something and you see someone's look on their face and it's not quite what we were planning. We meant it as a compliment, doesn't appear to be taken as a compliment. We see the facial change or we see the eyes change. We can, in that moment, decide we're going to do a repair right then. But sometimes we don't.
Right? Just do it. Just nip it in the bud. Just
cut the story there
quickly. Yeah.
I think so. But we don't want to be communicating and just expecting everyone to get our intent perfectly and not looking at how it all lands, because that's just being unplugged or reckless, I would say, the communication. So that's the speaker side. Then there's the receiver side. You got the impact. When you're in a close relationship and there's something said that doesn't match all the other information I have on that relationship, even though it felt bad and I have that impact, I don't necessarily have to stay there with what I perceive about it. I might inform it with all the other things I know. Wait, this is a person who has loved me for all these years. This is a person who supports what I do outside of the home. This is a person who cares about what I think and feel. And when you add those things back in, we might land on a different perception, which is what Stamp and Nap were talking about, which is we negotiate ultimately rather than just taking the face value of that impact, but actually negotiating it for our relationship. What does that mean? That thing you said. And I think we could also introduce the question and say, the person who's the receiver, if you have impact that you think mismatches the rest of your relationship, might be time to ask a question. When you said that thing, what were you meaning by that?
I feel like a perception check can go really well with this. We have a whole episode on that, but could you just real quick do a perception check? Either side could do a perception check.
Sure. Yeah. A perception check has 3 essential parts. One is where you talk about the behavior. The second part is where you offer 2 interpretations. And then the third is where you ask for a clarification. In the case where your husband said that thing to you and you didn't know what it meant, you could use a perception check and say, when you said that thing, whatever it is, fill in the blank, did you mean it that you weren't supportive of what I'm doing? Or were you trying to tell me something else? What's going on? And using that formula of the perception check gives us a chance to open up the communication. And the idea that we have multiple interpretations helps us communicate to the other party that we don't necessarily only have one point of view about what they said. In fact, that we're struggling to know what point of view to have, which is why the tool is so useful.
Yeah. We've done a lot of episodes, and I feel like that one is so practical.
Yeah.
You can pull it out in any kind of miscommunication. It's a winner for me.
Yeah. You should check out episode number 65. And
With this topic, it made me think a lot about like dating relationships and just the mismatch.
That's so funny.
I just thought I was a terrible dater, but my message to guys, I would be so clear in my words, but then everything else would mismatch and I would just fuck up their head. Do you know what I mean?
Let's unpack that. No, I'd like to hear about this a little bit more.
No, I said, I just want to be friends. And then you touched his arm and then you gave him those eyes and then you gave him a compliment and your tone of voice and all these other things were so mismatched. No wonder he's crazy because you're so confusing. This just brought up a lot of early dating things for me.
so you're owning that you led them on.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's terrible. I'm so sorry.
And the
I love-
world's better that you're off the market.
I just like to end. I was terrible. I'm so sorry. Happy Valentine's Day. Teighlor is off the market.
So that's a good Valentine's message. Figure out what you want to say and then try to have it match the impact.
Yeah.
We know that nonverbal carries the majority, if not almost all the meaning in the communication.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Nonverbal meaning your body language, the tone of your voice, right? Anything that isn't the spoken word that you're
Mhm.
conveying to someone. So like in Taylor's example, I want to be friends, but I'm being affectionate. I'm looking at you in a way that we know is suggestive,
Oh, Teighlor.
right?
So there's
That
a big
gives them
gap.
voice. Yeah. Yeah.
And ultimately, here's the thing that's not going to support Teighlor in this story, which is when you and I have a perceptual challenge like that, where we're hearing the words that say one thing and we're seeing the nonverbal behavior that suggests the other message, we're going to go with the nonverbal.
Yeah.
hmm
And
And
there's some reasons for that. One of the big reasons is that you and I, on perception, we believe that nonverbal is more authentic than the words you say because we think you can craft them in ways that you can control. But we believe nonverbal inherently is less controllable, so therefore more authentic and believable. And if it carries more of the meaning, we're going to just go with nonverbal every time.
What I liked about learning this is that it seemed most researchers on this subject kind of had this theme that when you approach these gaps with a sense of empathy and curiosity, rather than pretty much like a very black and white way of thinking, like it's exactly that, then your relationship thrives rather than just survives the motions. I feel like that's like happens around us all the time in relationships is we miss so much empathy and curiosity for each other. Or because you've been in a relationship for so many years, those two things seem to fall by the wayside. And you just keep going with that black and white way of thinking. That person meant this negative thing about me, and I'm not going to be empathic towards them or curious about that whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I think that's what ultimately I'm happy to be called out in this because it's almost like you need this jump start. Like, where did those two things go? Where did my empathy for my person or my friend go? Where'd the curiosity for that person go in what they're telling me? So that can be repaired and more successful, really.
Yeah.
But rather than just, I keep thinking that they meant this, and it's just a story I keep repeating in my head over, and it's just more and more negative. And then time just goes on, and you're across the Valentine's Day dinner table, and you have no empathy or curiosity for each other, and you're just doing emotions.
Yeah. And I
that-
think the other word that I was thinking when you're talking is it's easy to get complacent or lazy. It takes effort to be curious and empathetic.
Boom.
It's easier to just stay in our heads and decide what we think everyone means, not ask questions. And that complacency drives that separation, like we're talking about. But I thought the Valentine's Day reference is a good one to not just get to the Valentine's dinner and not have anything to say, but to really encourage everyone listening, say it doesn't have to be like that. You can sit down and say, strategically, what do I want out of this relationship? And what do I want out of this interaction over Valentine's? And I want to close the gap on what I mean by what's felt. And so I need to focus on that other person and understand how their impact experience will be and focus on them. And then from there, I can have a completely different experience.
Those are two very vulnerable places to put yourself, though.
Yeah.
Which I can see there's so much risk in that. But even like you've told us many times before, I think we're like joking that the longer you're together, the less risky it becomes.
Yeah.
You're invested so much more with so much more Valentines that you spend with somebody. Yeah. What do you have to lose except for to just have a life that you're just surviving?
Which is a big loss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just feel maybe it's just as you get older or people have children or there's different conflict. But it seems I talk to a lot more people that it's less of this honeymoon phase of relationship.
Yeah.
And and who am I to say it's not me too? I know I'm in a season of raising tiny people and I just feel a little lost in the sauce sometimes. And I feel like, yeah, I've lost some curiosity and I want to work at that. And that's not easy. I think the work is worth it.
The word I keep thinking is autopilot.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Just on autopilot. So just on repeat. Just kids are up, kids need things, doing this, going to work, coming back from work, doing laundry. But we want to stop and say, for those closest relationships, for the ones that we want to keep that are the most important, we do want to not be on autopilot. And I think you've really illustrated what autopilot gets us, which is autopilot dinner, autopilot encounter, date, whatever. Yeah. And the idea then is to do those two things. And let's talk about them then. So curiosity, I think, is a great one to talk about. When I'm curious, that means that not only am I intentional about trying to find out new information, I'm humble in that I don't think I know it already.
I really like that.
Because I think if we're listening to just confirm what I thought I knew, that's not curiosity.
I think some people listening are not going to like to hear that. Yeah, I'm curious, but yeah, that's exactly what you're saying. Being curious isn't asking or having that interest with thinking you already know the answer. It's thinking that's right. With humility, you said, to not.
Yeah, you have to go in with humility, thinking you maybe don't have all the information. And too often we think we do, so we're listening for just confirmation of what we already knew. But true curiosity suggests that you and I don't know all of the information, which I think is a great word to think about generally as maybe a goal for 2025. I want to be more curious in my world generally and not pretend I know all the answers and not walk into situations looking for just my own ideas to be confirmed.
I didn't really have a New Year's resolution yet, but now it's going to be more curious. So thank you.
It's a great word, right?
Yeah.
Thinking, so I've been married 10 years and I've changed a lot over the last 10 years. I feel like a different person now. For my partner to think he knows me would be pretty inaccurate and vice versa. I would think that, and how long have you been married, Dr. K? Like
35.
30? Yeah, 35.
35.
That at some point you have to keep coming in and get to know the person that, yes, they're the same person, but they've evolved over the years. Yeah. And as different things in life happens, you shape and grow and change and hopefully always, I don't know, become a different person. So to have that genuine curiosity.
I literally am writing down, how do I stay curious about us? That's my note for this and hearing what you're saying. And I just had this thought and I think it's funny because of Valentine's. I think we think the grass is greener, right? This is something we all go through in a relationship. And I think it's a part of being human, right? Wondering, well, what if it's different over there, here, there? But if I stay curious about what I've put my commitment and my risk in, then the reward will be so much greater, really, than just trying to flippantly find something new for the sake of being human and not having the empathy and curiosity within my own core, my unit.
Yeah.
It just completely was word thinking in my mind and saying out loud. I hope that made sense. But
word thinking in my mind.
Word thinking in my mind. Yeah, that's clearly the language of a person with toddlers and newborns. Anybody out there heard that? That only a mother would understand that.
It was perfectly clear to me.
Thank you, Dr. K. But yeah, I just think the defensiveness for me, I'm realizing in this, is the complete removal of curiosity of my partner and our teams. And that I can see if I keep that up, and I don't know why it's making emotional, but if I keep that up, I can see myself being just like people that I'm afraid to become. And I don't want to be like that.
Yeah. And I think that translates to, we're talking about those most important relationships. And I think about kids, and you all have little kids. And I think about the curiosity that they bring to the world and to the table, which is a really fun part of parenting.
Yeah.
But I also think that we can be curious about them So sometimes you hear a kid cry a bunch of times and you're like, you're just a crier. Come on, be quiet. But what's going on for that kid? What is happening there?
Yeah.
Let's not just be pissed off that you're crying again.
Yeah.
Let's actually go into that situation and get really curious and start thinking about what's going on for that kid.
Yeah.
And I love the idea, Meredith, that you're saying, apply this to the home team. Get with the home team and say, I'm going to be curious about all of it. And the payoff will be huge.
Yep. I was doing bedtime with my older daughter, who much prefers dad to bedtime, not me. And it was very an emotional moment of like, I want dad. And I was like, you want to talk about him? What if we just talked about him instead of did story time? Oh. And she was like, okay, like confused. And I was like, what does dad do that makes you feel good or whatever? And she was just like, I like when he holds me when I cry. And it was so sweet. But I felt like that day and the day before she was being extra cryy, whatever the term is for that, extra, I would probably be cheap and say like extra sensitive or whatever. But that she knew that's what made her feel safe at the end of the night, that that's what she wanted to talk about. And I was just like, oh, I got to lean into that win for her development. And it was just really nice. And then she was happy to go to sleep talking about the stories. This was the sweetest thing.
Yeah. I like that. That's a good switch on the dad's not available. Let's just talk about him then.
Yeah. Hey, maybe it was a way of being curious. I didn't even realize it.
But I think the other compliment I would make to you, Meredith, is I have raised adult children. They're now adults now. And they do go through phases where they favor one or the other.
Oh, yeah.
Of the parents. And I think you can see it as, oh, you don't love me or you don't want me. And you could get personal and defensive. And I don't hear that there.
No, I don't feel that way. I don't.
Right. But
I love it.
Sometimes people do get confused over that. And it's, hang on, this is just a 2-year-old.
Yeah.
Let's not read that much into it. But for some reason, there's something going on. And what I heard in that story is there's something about that firm protection, calm that he brings to her that's helping her emotionally today.
Yeah.
And it might be something different tomorrow. But today we're happy for her. That impact is there.
Yeah.
And always just take it as a compliment because you chose her parent. So you're welcome.
Oh, what a great way. I feel like that's such a good wrap up. If you're proud of your Valentine, just remember that's right. You picked that person.
Yeah. The only way you know dad is because I picked him. So
I like that. Yeah.
So we're back for another season.
I know.
Season 5.
2025. Hard to believe that this is our 5th season, but we are so thankful that you're with us, and we'll be back to bring you more content on communication and relationships. Once again, thank you for joining us today. Please remember to rate, share, and subscribe to our podcast. And thank you for listening to Asking for a Friend.